All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for registering and attending the Advanced Pentaho training. Today, we'll be focused on two items that we covered in the lecture session. So today, we'll be walking through how to use the row normalizer feature in Pentaho and the row normalizer feature in Pentaho. So we'll go through some transformations and a job to use this feature and to set up a transformation stream and execute it from the command line. So the row denormalizer and row normalizer, what they do is essentially pivots the data so that it's either denormalized or normalized. And we'll walk through how that works in Pentaho. So here I am in the Citrix DSVD staging environment. If I take a step back, all right, so I've accessed it from the Citrix Workspace desktop, but you can also access Citrix DSVD from the web application as well. So I'm currently using the Citrix desktop application, but you're also able to access this from the Citrix web application as well. So once you're in the Citrix DSVD staging environment, the first thing we're going to do is load Pentaho. So if you don't see it on your desktop, you can search the Windows key, you can search Pentaho, and you should see it there. You can also search Spoon specifically, and that should load as well. Let me just do it one more time. So you also search Spoon, and you can see that will load as well. So it's showing up as Pentaho, but again, Spoon is the GUI that is used to actually develop these transformations needed for the ETL. Pentaho is the entire suite, right? It's Pentaho data integration, but we're specifically using the GUI called Spoon. So it might show as Pentaho, but in actuality, we're using Spoon. And when you launch and load the application, right, it even says Spoon. And then you also get this welcome screen that you see here. So the first thing that we're going to work on is this row denormalizer. And so here's an overview of the steps we'll be taking. And actually, just go ahead and do this. There we go. So here's an overview of the transformation we'll be creating, right? So we'll begin by having a CSV file input. We'll then have a sort row step, a row denormalizer step that actually pivots the data. We'll then sort the data again, and then we'll write it into an Excel file. Right, so in this transformation stream, we're going from a CSV file where we're sourcing the data from, and we're outputting it into an Excel file. So here I am in Spoon. And before I even do anything with Spoon, I'm just going to first pull up the files that we need for today's training. So here I am in the training folder. It was also emailed as well. But right, so in the Pentaho training folder called Pentaho training, we have the decks right up front. Then we also have a folder called lab files, one for beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And so we'll be using these three files. So if you haven't already downloaded them, go ahead and download these files and just have them handy. So I've downloaded them. And so what I'm going to do is just going to open up these files. I'm just going to open the CSV files at this time. So this script movie file, I've downloaded it, but I'm not going to open it at this time. For now, I'm just opening these two CSV files, and we'll come back to this file. So again, download these three files, and you can go ahead and open up the two CSV files. We'll come back to this shell script file. This .sh is a shell script, and we'll come back to that later. So I've downloaded the CSV files. All right, there we go. So we'll be using, for this first exercise, we'll be working to go from normalized data to denormalized data. So here I have the file called, and this is in the way, there a way to hide this? Thought so. Okay, but first I'm working with a file called movies input normalized data. Right, so what I have here, if I expand these columns, I have an Excel or CSV file that has a table of normalized data, right? So I have a list of movies, the year they were released, and then I have some dummy data. So I have the quarter for each movie and how much the movie grossed in a specific quarter. So again, this isn't actual data, it's just dummy data. This doesn't reflect how much these movies actually grossed in these quarters. Right, so we have some duplicates here, like Do the Right Thing. Right, we have a Q4 earning of 95,000, and then we have a Q2 earning of 75,000, and then we have a bunch of other movies as well. Okay, so here we have Pentaho, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a transformation. I'm going to go to File, New, Transformation. And so we'll begin by first dragging over the CSV file input, because we're sourcing the data from a CSV file. So the first thing we're going to do is get the CSV file input, because that's the input of the data. Sorry, just doing something here on the other screen. Bear with me for a moment. Okay, I'm just going to zoom in so it's a little more clear. So there we go. Okay, so I have the CSV file input step. If I just dragged over, I'm going to double click on it. And when I do, I'm going to see a few different options here. Right, so I'm going to click on Browse to select the CSV file that I want to source data from. Click on Browse. And wherever your data is, wherever you save this file to, I recommend saving it in somewhere in your H drive. And there's a reason for that we'll go over later. But again, just wherever you've downloaded this file to, I recommend moving it to your H drive if it's not already stored there. And so I'm just going to select this movies input normalized data file, again, from my H drive where it's being stored. So once I've selected the file, I see this file name path, or this file path, right, H drive, and then the folder where it's located, and then the actual name of the file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove everything but the actual file name. So the path I'm going to remove. So I just have this slash, right, this backward slash, and then I have the name of the file. So like we did in the beginner and the intermediate training, you can change the file name to include a variable, right? So rather than referring to the H drive, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the path with a variable. So I'm going to press Control and space, right? To add a variable, if you hover over this question mark, it says enter Control space to select a variable to insert. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control space, and I'm going to choose this variable called internal. Where is it? Be further down the page, excuse me. Sorry, just give me a moment. I'm not seeing that variable at the moment, so we'll come back to this. So for now, we'll just select the file, right? We're going to select the file that we want to input data from. And then we're going to click on Get Fields over here. And once I click on Get Fields, it's then going to load, right, the fields from my CSV file. Right, so the same fields that I'm seeing here. Movie, year, quarter, and gross are the same fields that I see in my CSV file, right? Movie, year, quarter, and gross. Additionally, I see the data type, right? Movie is a string, quarter is a string, and then the year and the gross are integers, right? So if these data types were not correct, I would then be able to update it and change them to whatever the correct data type is. But the data types that Pentaho automatically gave these fields is correct, so I'm good to go, right? So I selected my file, excuse me, where I'm sourcing the data from. I then clicked on Get Fields, and I got all the fields from the CSV file. And now I'm just going to rename the step. I'm just going to call this step Movie CSV File Input. So really just added movie to it, or movies, I should say. Okay, so then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sort this data, because I want to group on certain fields. I'm going to search for sort rows, and then I'm going to double click, or I can drag this over, right? Or I can just double click on the step. And so once I've dragged over the field, I'm then going to link this, right? I'm going to connect these two steps. I'm just going to select the main output of step. I'm going to make this slightly smaller. There we go. Right, so in this sort row step, I'm really just using this step to do one thing, and that's to group on certain fields. I'm going to click on Get Fields. It's going to return all 4 fields from my data source, but I'm really only interested in these 2 fields. So I'm going to highlight these 2 fields, right click, and hit delete. So I have movie and I have year. So I'm sorting first by movie and then by year. But at this point, I'm not too concerned about the actual sorting, but I want to group on these 2 fields, the movie field and the year field. Because looking at the data, right, the quarter and the gross are attached to the movie, a movie and a year, right? So for example, Do the Right Thing was released in 1989. I have 2 instances of Do the Right Thing that was released in 1989. And then I have a quarter 4 of a 95,000 and a quarter 2 where it earned 75,000. Right? So the movie and the year are kind of like a composite key, right? Those are the 2 fields that we want to group. And the quarter and the gross, right, they're attached to certain movie year grouping. All right, so selected movie and year. I'm going to hit on OK. The next step I'm going to use is the row denormalizer step, right? So again, I'm just going to search row denormalizer and select it. And I'm going to connect, again, this step. So looking at the row normalizer, there's a few things that I need to enter. So the first is this key field. So I'm going to select the quarter field. And again, this is a key field from my data input, which again is a CSV file with these 4 fields, right? Movie, year, quarter, and gross. So I'm going to select quarter, because this field is the key to the pivoting or the denormalizing of data, right? So this is the field that we're going to key on in order to denormalize and pivot the data. So I'm going to select quarter. It's going to be a little clearer, right? Once we get over here where I selected the quarter. The next are the fields that make the grouping. So remember how we sorted in the previous step on 2 fields, movie and year? I'm going to then insert those fields here, right? So I can click on Get Fields if I want to. I can manually just type in those fields, or I can click on Get Fields. It's going to give me all 4 fields that I have, and then I can just remove the fields that I don't want, right? Again, I don't care about quarter and gross at this point. I just manually enter in. I must have pressed the wrong thing, but I can enter in movie, and then the other field is year that I want to group by. All right, there we go. So I have movie and I have year. It seems like I entered in a space over here. So I'm going to delete that. So now we have, right, 2 fields, movie and year, that we're grouping by, right? Because again, looking at the data, right, a quarter and a gross is attached to a movie and year, right? The movie and the year go hand in hand, right? And so quarter and a gross is for a specific movie in a given year. And so that's where I'm grouping by movie and year. Okay, then I'm going to enter target field names. So here I'm entering new fields that data is going to be written into, right? So I'm going to enter in quarter 1. I'll call this quarter 2, quarter 3. Spell that. And let's call this quarter 4. And where will the values be coming from these fields, right? These are the target fields. So this is where the source data is being written into, right? So the source data it's called the source field, and the fields where the data is being written into is called the target fields, right? So I'm creating these 4 target field names. They don't yet exist because at this point, all I have are the 4 fields that are present in my source data, right? So I'm defining these 4 target fields, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, and which data will these fields be populated with, right? Which values will these fields be populated with? I'm going to populate them with the gross values, right? So I'm going to enter in gross for each of these target fields. Right, but which gross values, we need to tell Pentaho, right, which gross values to populate these target fields with, right? And so we have to have a key value in order to do that. So for quarter 1, for example, if I look at the data, right, so if we now have a quarter 1 target field, and we want to enter in a gross value into that quarter 1 target field, we need to know where the value should be coming from, right? So the key field tells Pentaho, right, in this quarter 1 field, enter in a value of 50,000 where the quarter is Q1, right? For the quarter 2 field, enter in gross values where the key value is Q2. So we're grouping by movie and year, right? We're grouping by movie and year. We're then going to populate the new target field with the gross values, and we're populating that target field with the gross values based on, right, the quarter value for that movie and year, right? So for using this first movie as an example, for a separation with the year 2011, the quarter 1 field will be populated with the 50,000 when this quarter is Q1. Right, so for the key value, we put in Q1 for quarter 1. I'll enter in Q2 for quarter 2, Q3 for quarter 3, and Q4 for quarter 4. Right, and these are all integers as well. Right, they're just basic numbers. And I'm going to press enter or OK. So it's saying the incoming data is not sorted on the specified keys. So that's okay, because we're going to have another step, right? We recommend sorting the incoming data within transformation. So we'll have another step to resort the data. So for now, we can say okay, and we can proceed. Right, so alternatively, I entered in all this information in this target field section manually. I could have also hit get lookup fields. And Pentaho would have done its best, right, to fill this out. So in this case, when I let Pentaho, when I press get lookup fields, right, Pentaho gave, and let me actually just have, so let me actually do this instead. Let me just drag a new field just to illustrate this a little more, connect them. So if I press get lookup field, then you can see Pentaho automatically, right, created target fields with generic names, right, field 2, 3, 4, 5, and a value field name for each of the existing fields that we have in our data source, right? So it doesn't exactly correspond to what we needed, right? So essentially, Pentaho just decided to, when we clicked on get lookup fields, right, it pulled up each of the lookup fields, right, each of the source fields in our data, right, movie, year, quarter, and gross, and then it created a generic field name, right? This isn't really applicable to what we need. So in some situations, pressing get fields or get lookup fields, and then in Pentaho retrieve the data for you makes sense. In other cases, you'll have to manually make those associations yourself. And there we go. Okay, so the next step is we're going to resort the data one more time. So I'm going to do another sort row step. Again, connecting these two steps. And I'm going to sort on 2 fields. So again, I'm going to click on get fields. Now you can now see, right, in this, now when I click on get fields, rather than showing the 4 fields from my data source, movie, year, right, movie, year, quarter, and gross, rather than showing these 4 fields, Pentaho is now retrieving 6 fields, right? So movie and year, and then quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, right? That's because in this stream, we've defined these new target fields. And so Pentaho, right, in the previous step, in the row to normalizer, right, we defined these 4 target fields, right? Quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. And so those are the 4 fields that we're now seeing in the next sort row step, right? So now in sort rows, when I clicked on get fields, that's why it's now pulling 6 fields instead of 4 fields, and it's also pulling the 4 fields that were defined from the previous step. But in this case, right, I'm only interested in sorting on 2 fields. I'm going to remove all these quarter fields. They're not necessary. And now I'm going to put this year field, I'm going to move it up so it's above the movie field. Right, so now when we export or when we write into a new Excel file, these values will be sorted first by year and then by movie. And so the final step, right, once we've normalized or denormalized and sorted the data, the final step is to then write it into a file. So we could have done, so we can really put this wherever we want, right? So in the output step, I can write this into an Excel file, right? Or I could write this into a database table. So we can really write it into various data sources. In this example, we're going from a CSV file into an Excel file. But in the next example that we do, we'll be doing something else. Excuse me. So I'm going to pull over this Microsoft Excel writer. I'm going to just dump it right there. And once again, I'm going to connect the stream, right? So to connect it, again, you press and hold Shift, and then you pull it over, right? And you see that arrow. So again, you press and hold Shift, you click on it, and then you drag it over. And so these are called hops, right? Like we discussed in the beginner intermediate. These little arrows that connect one step to another step are called hops. Okay, so now we have this Microsoft Excel Writer step. And really just a few things that I'm focused on this step. So first, the file name and the file path. I'm going to click on Browse. I'm going to choose a file path, wherever you want. So I'm just going to put it on my desktop. Doesn't really matter in this case. So let's write it into the desktop. So we'll save it as Excel 2007 and above. And I will just call this, let me see, I'll call this movie output denormalized. I'll hit OK, or I hit save. All right, there's the file path. I'll then change this extension, right, to match Excel 2007 and above. Again, just matching whatever version of Excel you have. I'm actually not sure. I'm assuming this is 2007 and above, but I guess I should check. Let's see. Where can I find the Excel version? Okay, so this is Excel 2010, right? And so it is in fact by 2007 and above. Okay, so I have the file name, right, that I entered, and the file path. I chose the correct extension. And now I can rename this sheet. I don't have to, right? I'm just going to call this movie data from sheet 1, the generic term, to movie data. And then make the sheet active. Yep, I don't want to hide it. And then if this file already exists, I can choose to replace the sheet. If the sheet has the same name, I can choose to replace it, or I can choose to write to a new sheet. So I'm going to choose the replace option. And I'm going to hit on OK, right? So there's a bunch of other stuff you can do, right? You can include date in the file name, time in the file name, right? It can be updated accordingly. But at a basic level, right, you choose the file name, the extension, and then you can rename the sheet. If you want to do additional stuff, you can. I'm going to hit OK. Right, then I'm going to name this. Right, so right now I haven't named this transformation, I haven't saved it. So I'm going to click on File, Save As. I'm going to save this transformation as, I'll call it Transformation Movie Normalizer. Actually, it's a denormalizer, excuse me. So we'll call this Transformation Movie Denormalizer. You can really name it whatever you want. I'm going to click on Save. And you can see the name has been updated accordingly. There we go. That makes sense. So, okay, so the first thing that we did, right, is when I had this Csv file input, I wanted to change the file name and really the file path to use a variable. but the variable I wanted to use was not showing up. And that's because I had not yet saved the transformation, right? So since I've saved the transformation, I'm now going to remove it. I have this file name and file path of the CSV file that I'm sourcing data from. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove everything before the actual name of the file itself, right? So here's this name, here's the name of the file. So everything before the name of the file, I'm going to remove, right? And so now I just have this backward slash and then the name of the file. So next to the file name, you see a little question mark or a little, not question mark actually, just a little like blue box with a, I think that's a $sign or an S. But it says, enter control space to select a variable to insert. So we've done this previously on job files. So in the beginner intermediate training, we did this on a job file where we inserted a variable. So what we're going to do now is in the transformation file, I'm going to press control space. And here's the variable that I want to use, internal entry current name. So what this variable is doing essentially is regardless of wherever the transformation is moved to, it's going to be able to locate it, right? Because currently, I'm just going to press cancel. Currently, right, this is specifically pointing to this H drive location, right? But what happens if the transformation, right, is moved to a different location? Oh, sorry. What happens if the CSV file is moved to a different location, right? Currently, it's in my H drive, but it could be moved to a different location. So if my transformation file is still pointing to the H drive, then this transformation is going to fail because that file is no longer located in the H drive, right? So I can insert a variable, but the file location is dynamic so that regardless of wherever I move the file to, Pentaho is going to be able to locate it. Right, so this internal entry current directory. Right, so you can see when I hover over it, it says the value of the variable, right, currently is this H drive, right, because it's currently being stored in the H drive. But if I was to move it to another location, right, it would then reference the location of where it was moved to. Right, so I'm making the file path dynamic, right? So regardless of wherever my input file is being stored, Pentaho will be able to locate that file, right? And so once I select it, it then will pull the variable, and then it's still going to have the file name over here, right? So I'm going to press OK. All right. So I have my CSV file input. I'm then sorting it by movie and year. I'm then denormalizing the data, i.e. pivoting it. Right, so I'm pivoting it to, instead of having just a quarter and a gross field, to instead have a field for each individual quarter that contains the gross values. And then sorting it again so that it's ordered by year, then movie. And then I'm writing it into this Excel file. And I can say movies outputs. All right, so I'm going to press save. And yep, so we got a question, please share the recording. So the recording will be shared afterwards, after the training. Okay, so there's a few different ways that you can execute a transformation. In this case, we're just going to execute it within Spoon itself. So within Spoon, you can see here there's a button, there's like a play button. So if I press play, it's going to go ahead and execute the steps that I have here in the transformation file. So here we go, I'm going to go ahead and click it. I'm gonna go ahead and press run, right? You can change the different levels of logging, right? So Pentaho will log, right, as it's doing the transformations of these various steps. Pentaho will generate a log, and you can change the log level. So it's, the standard one, it's very detailed, and, or you can do no logging at all, right? So obviously, in terms of performance, right, the more detailed the log, right, because Pentaho is recording more steps and more details, it's going to have a performance hit on the actual runtime for the transformation to execute, right? This is a really, really simple transformation. It's not going to take a long time to execute, but if you do something that's heavier and you have like more detailed logging, right, there could be a performance hit on how long it takes for the transformation to execute. So, okay, I'm going to click on run. Okay, so you can see that was really quick. It took like, I don't know, a second for Pentaho to execute. Okay, so I see the file input step, the stored row step, the rows normalizers, movie output step, right? So I'm going to go and see, right, if it wrote it to the location. And I can see green check marks, right? So it looks like this transformation was executed successfully. And to double check, right, I wrote it into my desktop in this movie output denormalized file. So if I navigate to my desktop and I look for that file, so there it is, right? Movie output denormalized. And if I open it up, so here is the denormalized data, right? So here's the output. So I have movie, remember I sorted it by year, then movie, right? So I have the year in ascending order, 1979, 1980, 1989, right? And then I have the movie as well. Right, so in the case like here where we have 2 movies in a given year, it sorts it first by the year, 2007, right? And then by the movie title. So N comes before T, and therefore I see should be no country for old men, before there will be blood. Excuse me. Right, so this is the denormalized pivoted data. If I look at the source file, the source data, right, here's the source data, right? So movie, year, and then we have a quarter column with values for each quarter, right? Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. And then we have the gross values, right, in its own field, right? So here's the normalized data. And then when we pivoted it, right, in the output, here's the pivoted data, right? Quarter 1. And remember, right, we have that row denormalizer step where we define the target fields. So in this row denormalizer step, right, remember, this is really the key step where we define these target fields, right? Quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. And then we're defining what to populate these fields with, right? So we're populating them with the gross values based on the Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 values in the source data, right? So looking at the source data, I see, for example, do the right thing in Q4 has a gross value of 95,000, and do the right thing in Q2 has a gross value of 75,000, right? So looking at do the right thing, Q4 95,000, Q2 75,000, right, in the source data. When I look at the output data, right, here's do the right thing, right? Quarter 2, 75,000, quarter 4, 95,000. Right, so the data has been pivoted, and the gross values, instead of being contained within their own column for gross values, they've been written into the appropriate quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4 value based on the quarter value that they had in the source data. Okay, and so that was, right, the steps to take normalized data and denormalize it, right? So essentially pivoting the data, right, based on the fields that we specify. Right, and then in this case, excuse me, since it's just from one CSV file to an Excel file, right, I just executed the transformation within Pentaho Spoon itself, right? I just ran it in Spoon itself within the transformation file. And when I did that, right, it logged the various steps. Right, and I have some basic details, because I just chose the basic logging. It has basic details for each step. Excuse me. If I scroll up, I see a bunch of like red warnings. Oh, and actually these are from something I was doing before. So you can see, all right, these logs, you can see this is 430.12, 430.12. So this is some testing I was doing before in Pentaho. And you can see the logs that I just ran now, right? This one just started at 146, right? So 146, this is when the transformation was opened, and I launched the transformation and executed the steps, right? So in my log, it's like these previous logins that I'm seeing are just from other stuff I was doing previously in Spoon, right? And so I can even just delete, I can clear the log, and I can run this again. Right, and now I just have the logging from what I just executed now, rather than having the history of stuff I was doing before. Okay, so the next thing we're going to, the next transformation that we're going to go through is the row normalizer, right? So we're going to work on a transformation that normalizes data, right? And so this is going to be a little simpler. Well, the transformation itself will only have 3 steps. We'll have a Csv File Input step, a row normalizer step, and then we'll have a table output step. So rather than reading from a CSV file and writing into an Excel file, we'll read from a CSV file and we'll write into a MySQL table. Right, and in this case, we're not going to execute the transformation within Spoon itself. We're going to execute the transformation from the command line. Right, so the transformation itself will be a bit simpler, but we're going to set it up so it can be executed from the command line. So we'll do a transformation, we'll do a job file, and then we'll also do the steps, right, to put the files onto the Pentaho server so that it can be executed from the command line. Okay, so the first step again is file, and then new transformation. Okay, so the first thing, like I said, is we're gonna be reading from a CSV file. We're gonna drag over this file input step, make it a little bigger, 150, and so there we go. Right, and so here is the file we'll be reading from, this movies input denormalized data. Right, and notice how I don't have any spaces. I'm using underscores. That's really important because we're going to be putting this onto the Pentaho server to be executing from the command line, right? And so we don't want any spaces because that's going to, we'd run into issues executing from the command line if we had spaces in our file names. So we want to make sure that we don't have any spaces. And so it's named movies underscore input underscore denormalized underscore data. Right, so here is the CSV file we're reading data from, right? So this is the denormalized data, right? So we have the title of the movie, we have the year, then we have quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. And so in the previous example, we went from normalized to denormalized. In this case, we're going from denormalized to normalized. So we're going to be pivoting this data in a normalized fashion. Okay, so the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to File, Save As, and I'm going to save this as transformation. And let me delete what I have here before. We're going to be normalizing this. Let me go ahead and delete this. So I'll call this transformation underscore movie underscore normalizer. You can name it whatever you want. This is what I'm choosing to name it. So transformation underscore movie underscore normalizer. Again, not having any spaces in the file name. I'm going to click on save. Okay. So then I am going to drag over the row normalizer step, or excuse me, actually the first thing I'm going to do is open up the CSV file input step. I'm going to choose a file name, right? I'm going to choose which file that I want to use to read data from. I'm going to click on browse. I'm going to navigate to wherever this file is. Again, I recommend, right, when you downloaded it, if it's not on your H drive, I recommend moving it to your H drive, right? And so here we go, movies input denormalized data.csv. So again, choosing the file from an H drive location. And what I'm going to do, like we did in the last exercise, right, I'm going to make this file location dynamic. So rather than just having it on the H drive, or so rather than having this file name point specifically to the H drive, I'm going to remove everything but the file name and this backward slash. I'm going to just press Control Space. I'm going to add a variable, internal entry current name directory, because again, you can see right in this little tooltip, right now it's showing that the file is in the H drive, but if the file is moved somewhere else, I want Pentaho to be able to find the file. Okay, I'm going to click on Get Fields. And there we go. Pentaho has pulled all the fields, right? And again, it gave them the correct data type. And so if it wasn't correct, I could go ahead and manually update it, right? Make whatever changes I wanted to make. But what Pentaho pulled is correct and it's accurate. So I'm going to click on OK. Then I'm going to choose, and if I want to, right, I can rename this file, the step. I can call this movies input or movies CSV file input. Okay, then we're going to have the row normalizer step. I'm going to pull this over. And I'm going to connect these two. I'm going to choose the main output. So what we see here when we connect them, you can set up your transformation so that if an error occurs, if something's wrong with the data or an error occurs, the quote unquote bad data will be written into another step, right? So I could have this error handling step, and then I could have like a text file, right, where those error steps are then written into. The purpose of doing that is that if Pentaho encounters an error, right, if Pentaho encounters an error currently, the way I have it set up, it's going to kill the transformation. Right? The transformation will be stopped as soon as that error occurs, right? If you use this error handling step, it's going to essentially, right, filter the bad data, whatever is causing the error, into another step, so that the main transformation will go on as normal, and the bad data or whatever is causing the error, right, will be written into a separate step. So for this row normalizer step, I have a few different fields, again, like we saw with the row denormalizer. So this type field is the output field name. So I'm going to put in quarter, right? So currently this field doesn't exist, but this type field is the field that I want to write data into, right? So it's going to be the output field. Then I have this section over here, so I can click on Get Fields, and I'm returned, right, all the fields that I have in my CSV file. So title, year, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. So I'm going to remove title and year. I'm going to focus on these 4 fields, right? Quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Right, so remember, what we're doing here is we're normalizing the data, right? So rather than having a field for each quarter, right, I want to have one output field, right, which is this quarter field. So quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Instead of having 4 distinct fields for each quarter, I want to have one field, which I have to find here as the output field for quarter, right? Then for the type, in this output field, I want to have a value for each of these quarters, right? So quarter 1, I'm going to give a value of Q1. Quarter 2, I'm going to give a value of Q2. Quarter 3, I'm going to give a value of Q3. And quarter 4, I'm going to give a value of Q4. Right, then I need an additional field in this new field. Because right now, all I've done is made an association. I've made this output field for quarter that should contain, right, these values for quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, right? So Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 will be populated in this quarter field. But what I also need to do is I have in my input data, right, these in quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, right, I have all these values that are currently in them, right? So what am I going to do with these amount values? They need to go somewhere, right? Because all I've done so far is I'm putting quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4 into their own quarter field and assigning a value of Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. But all these amount values are currently existing. They need to be put into a field. And so in this new field, I'm entering in gross. And I'm going to have all these values go into a field called gross. Right, so the gross values will correspond with the quarter, right? So as we look at the source data, right, when the data gets pivoted, we'll have a quarter 2, we'll have the quarter field with a Q2 value of 60,000, right, for Apocalypse Now in 1979, right? So the gross value will be 60,000, but the quarter value will be Q2. Right, and so I see that mapping right here, right? Quarter 1, Q1 will have the gross, so it'll be the gross will be the value for Q1 in the quarter field. The gross would be the value of Q2 in the quarter field. Gross would be the value of Q3 in the quarter field. Gross would be the value of Q4 in the quarter field, right? That corresponds to the current quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4 values, respectively. I'm going to hit on OK. Then the next step is, where do I want to write this data into, right? So in this case, right, I have a bunch of output steps that I can choose from. In this case, I'm writing into a database table. I'm going to choose the table output step and drag that over. And once again, connect the dots. Okay, so in this table output step, I need to define this database connection, right? So this is a database, so I have to define the database connection. So I'm going to click on New. And when I click on New, it's going to open up this database connection. So remember, you can also, if you want to create a database connection, you can also do it from View, Database Connection, right-click in New. right? So I can do it through the step, or I can do that database connection from the view tab as well. So either way, right? Either from table output, I can click on new, or I can right click on database connection and click on new that way. All right, so I'm going to click on new. I'm going to define this MySQL database connection. All right, so for the connection type, I'm going to choose MySQL. For the connection name, I'm going to call this MySQL D2D Pentaho training, because that's the name of the schema we're going to be using. So MySQL, because it's a MySQL database, and then D2D Pentaho training, because that's the table that we'll be, or sorry, that's the schema that we'll be using. So the host name, I'll enter in this MySQL staging host name. For the database name, so if I go to MySQL, right, this is the D2D staging environment. So I can open up that connection, right? And so here's the D2D Pentaho training, right? The same schema that we use in the beginner intermediate trainings, right? So there's the same schema, D2D underscore Pentaho underscore training. You can see in this, schema, right? We have a bunch of movie output tables that has been created, right? One for each user who signed up for this training. All right, so the database name, I'm going to choose the schema, right? D2D underscore Pentaho training. Username, enter in your MySQL username. Password, enter in your MySQL staging password. Right, again, just basic database connections that we've done in beginner and intermediate, right? Nothing's changed, just again, doing the same connection that we used before. I'm going to click on test, and you can see it's successfully connected, right, to this MySQL database. I can click on OK. So I have that connection. I can then choose my target table. So I'm going to choose my own table, right? So movies underscore CA, right? So there's a table for each user. And so I'm going to choose movies underscore CA. I'm going to click on OK. We're going to do a truncate and load. This table is empty anyway. So if I go to MySQL and I query this table, it's empty. But I'll do a truncate and load anyway. So we'll truncate the table. Obviously, it's already empty, so we wouldn't really do anything, but we'll just choose truncate, excuse me. And then we're going to choose specify database fields. Then I'm going to go to this database fields section, click on get fields. Okay. So the stream field is the source field, right? So if I look at the, so stream field refers to the source, and table field refers to the target table, right? So if I look at my target table, which is this movies underscore CA, if I look at the target table, I have 5 columns, right? ID, title, year, quarter, and gross, right? And ID is an auto increment table. Title, year, quarter, and gross. Right, so here I've specified these 4 fields to read data from and to output data into, right? So I don't have ID here because I have nothing, you know, I'm not reading an ID value from another source and writing into. The ID value that I see in my table, this is auto-generated, right, based on the records. So I'm really just concerned about title, year, quarter, and gross. Right, these are the 4 fields in my source data, right, that I want to write into my target table. So if I look at the source data, I actually have 6 fields. So when I say these are the 4 fields, it's kind of weird, right? Because we have title, year, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, right? So our source data has 6 fields, and it doesn't have a year, or it doesn't have a quarter or a gross field. It has a quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, right? But remember, in this stream, in this transformation stream, in this row normalizer step, we pivoted the data. So quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, right, are now pivoted into one quarter field with values Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. And then those amount values, those are now going to be populated in the gross field, right? So when we have this row normalizer step and we pivoted the data, we created 2 new fields, right? This output field called quarter, and then this new field, right, called gross. Right, so it was created in the transformation stream, right? Title and year, the title and year field are coming directly from, right, the CSV file, right? Title and year are coming directly from the CSV file. Whereas quarter and gross, right, they were created in this row normalizer step, right? So they're created in the transformation stream. And so in my table output step, I'm going to specify the database fields. So first, I didn't save it before. So first I need to choose my target table. Once again, right, the table I want to write into. So I'm going to choose this movies field. I'm choosing truncate. I'm going to specify the database fields, right? I'm going to click on get fields. And title and year are coming directly from the CSV file, but quarter and gross, right, the values are still coming from the CSV files, but the quarter and gross fields were created through this Pentaho stream. So that's why this, again, is called the stream field, because it can either be coming directly from the source, or it can be also it can be created through the transformation stream, right? So title and year, I mean, all the values themselves, right, all the values themselves are coming from the CSV file. But then the fields, quarter and gross, right, those fields were created in this row normalizer step when we pivoted the data. Right, so we're sourcing data from these 4 fields, and then we're writing them into these 4 fields in the database, right? And so Pentaho has done, when I clicked on get fields, Pentaho did the mapping. The mapping wasn't correct. I could then update the mapping, however I wanted to, right? But in this case, the mapping is correct. Title to title, year to year, quarter to quarter, gross to gross, right? I don't have ID here because I'm not pulling ID from the source data or from the stream, right? ID is an auto increment field. So I'm only concerned about the fields that are coming from the source data or from the transformation stream. So those are the fields I've defined in this mapping. I'm going to click on OK. All right, so we have the transformation set up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a job. Right, so I'm going to click on New and then Job. So I'm going to click on Start, and this is because I'm not going to execute this directly. So I'm not executing this transformation directly from Spoon like we did with the denormalizer example. I'm going to execute this transformation, right? I'm going to execute this transformation from the command line like we did in the beginner intermediate training. So rather than doing it from the transformation directly, I'm going to revert to the way we did it in beginner and intermediate through the command line, right? And so I'm going to create a job file, right, in order to do this, right? So I have the start step. And again, if you click on the start step, it seems like you can schedule it. But D2D uses the Pentaho Community Edition. So even though you see a scheduling, capability, this actually won't do anything, right? Because only the Pentaho Enterprise Edition comes with scheduling from Spoon, because DCD has a community edition, we can only schedule tasks through the cron, right? We can't schedule tasks directly from Spoon. We can only do scheduling through cron. So I'm still putting a start step just as like a dummy step, right? So just visually, when I'm looking at this job file, I see a start step, even though I'm not actually scheduling anything from the start step. Next, I'm going to then throw in the transformation. So here's the transformation. I'm going to connect these two steps. Right, so for this transformation, I'm going to select the transformation that I just created, right? So this transformation, movie normalizer, that's the transformation that I'm going to select. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the transformation file path so that it's dynamic, right? Rather than only referencing the H drive, I'm going to change it so that the transformation file path is dynamic. I'm going to choose this internal job file name directory. So essentially, as long as this transformation that I'm referring to is in the same location as the job file, Pentaho will know where to find it. And that's going to be the case, right? I'm going to keep these job files and transformation files in the same folder. And so it doesn't matter where the transformation file is that I'm referencing, as long as it's in the same folder as the job file, Pentaho will know where to reference it. I'm just going to call this entry movie transformation, right? This step. And then I'm also going to add logging capabilities. I'm going to click on specify log file, include the date and the time of the log file. The extension should be log1. And the name for this log file, I'm going to call this log movie transformation. So let me call this, to make it a little more clear, so I'll call this email movie log. And again, I'm going to give it a dynamic path. So I'm going to again, let me add a /. So I'm going to choose as the location this job file name directory. Then I'll add a mail step. So I'll call this success mail, success email. So if I have a successful execution of this job, it's going to send out an email. And this is the same configuration we use in the beginner and intermediate. That's why I'm kind of just gliding through this mail step and this job, right? We're just setting it up the same way it's been set up in beginner and intermediate. So we include the date. Click on that option, and we'll call this movie ETL success. I will add a little note, the movie ETL has completed successfully. Oops. Successfully. And then for attached files, we'll say, yep, we'll attach the log file, and we'll attach a zipped file. We'll zip it up, and we'll just call this zip. You can call it whatever you want, or call it movie ETL, that's it. And I'll hit OK. So again, we're just setting this up the same way that it was set up in beginner and intermediate. So I'm just gliding through it. In the beginner and intermediate deck, we have examples of how to set up, a job, like a basic job file, and then also, how to configure the mail step. All right, then we'll add a success step. Whoops, we'll add a success step. And this is another dummy step. It doesn't actually do anything, but just visually, it kind of just completes the picture. Right, so if I click on it, it doesn't actually do anything, it just has the name. But it's just for the visual of the job file. Then the success email, I'm gonna copy this and paste. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a failure email. So the event that it fails, it'll generate a failure email. So I'll call this failure email. I'll update the message to movie ETL failure. And the movie ETL failed. See attached logs. All right, then I'll save this. I'll call this job_movie_normalizer. Job_movie_normalizer. Again, you can color whatever you want. And I'll save. I already had a file, so I'm going to go ahead and overwrite it. And there we go. Right, so I have my transformation, which is actually doing the actual step of normalizing the data and pivoting it. Then I have, right, this job file, right, which executes the transformation and then sends me a success email or a failure email, depending on what happens. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Winscp. I'm going to move these files right from my local to the Pentaho server. Right, so we have training folders here. Right, so I'm just going to navigate to my own training folder. Right, same directory as before. There's my training folder. I'm gonna pull over the transformation file. So the transformation movie normalizer. I want to pull that over. I want to pull over the job file. So I'm going to pull that over. Right, these are the transformation and job files we just created, and that's saved to my H drive. I'm going to pull those two over. And then I'm going to pull over also the CSV file. Right, so for the denormalized data that we're normalizing, I'm going to pull over that CSV file as well. Right, this file right here. And I'm going to update the permissions. Right, I want them accessible to the Pentaho group. And I'm going to give them read and write permissions as well. All right, so at the beginning, I referenced, right, this shell script that we're going to use to execute. So we already used these two lab files, right, these two CSV files, but then we have the shell script that's actually going to execute the job and the transformation, right, from the command line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up that shell script file. So here we go. Just go to the location of where I saved it. So here is the shell script. I'm going to edit this, open this in Notepad++. I'm going to right click on it and open it in Notepad++. Right, and so this is a template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this as with my own initials. I'm going to save it on the H drive as well. Right, so I'm going to just, again, update the relevant fields. Put in my job file name. So here's the job file. There we go. Again, a reference to my job file. There we go. Here's my job file. I'm going to change this a little bit. I'm going to make this log. I'm going to remove this KJB. I don't really need a reference that because this is here for the log file. And same thing here. I'm going to enter in my job file name, then modify it slightly so that it's a log. So it says log. All right. I'm going to save this. And now that shell script, here it is. I'm going to drag over the shell script, give it the correct permissions and file ownership, and hit OK. All right, so I have my transformation file, my job file, the CSV file where the data is being sourced from, and then the shell script, right? It's just going to execute the job. Right, they all have the correct permissions. Right, so what I can now do is I can go to PuTTY, which is the secure shell terminal that we use. I can navigate to my folder. And then I can then execute the shell script. Right, so rather than executing this directly in Spoon, right, from the transformation, I'm instead executing this through the command line, right? So I made a job file, I made a shell script, then I'm executing this from the command line. And so once I execute that shell script, if I go back to my directory, right, and I refresh this directory, I now see an additional log. I can open up this log. And take a look. Right, so it was successful, but I actually messed up in one step. Looking at the log. If I go back to the job file, in my success email, I entered it in incorrectly. So just take a look at this. So the sender address should be Cheesy or Lily. There we go. So I put that into the wrong sender name, Cheesy or Lily, but the actual email address needs to go into the sender address field. Right, before I have the email address and the sender name field, it needs to be in the sender address field. I'm going to save this job file, make that change, and I'm just going to drag it back over. So here's the job file. I'm going to drag it over, and it's going to overwrite. So I'm going to run this again from the command line. And if I look at the log that's generated, it shows that it was successful and that it's finished in about 19 seconds. And if I look at my email, right, I now see this movie ETL success, right? I got the success email with the message that I wrote. And I get the log, the emailed log as well, right? So I have the log that's generated within the directory, but also have this emailed log. Right, and that's what I'm seeing here. So if I go to the MySQL table, right before this table was empty. Right now, when I run this again, I now see it's been populated, right, with data from my input. So again, here's my input CSV file, the denormalized data, title, year, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, right? And so I've pivoted it, and then I wrote it into this MySQL table. So this transformation, right, CSV file input, it pivoted the data, and then it wrote it into this table output step, which is the MySQL table. And so here is the MySQL table, right, with this pivoted data. Right, and so that's the example of how you then take denormalized data, pivot it, and then write it into a database. So again, the inputs and outputs can be various sources. Pentaho allows you to input data from, to be an S3 bucket, it could be a CSV, it could be an Excel, it can be a database, right? And they can output it into, again, you can output it into whatever Pentaho defines, right? Right, you have a list of different output options and a list of different input options, right? So it's 2:32. We went a little bit over. But again, right, those were the two examples. One, how to pivot normalized data and denormalize it. And then the other, how to pivot denormalized data and normalize it, right? And write it into a database. So again, this session is being recorded. It's going to be available. I think it takes about 10 or 15 minutes. After I, end the recording for it to become available, you can just go to the Google Calendar, and it's going to be on the calendar event. And we'll also upload this training video to the D2D portal as well, and it will be available there for you guys to watch it or rewatch it. If you have any questions, reach out to Ask D2D, askd2d@jsa.gov. I'll drop that email in the chat. But thank you for signing up for the training. Thank you for attending the training. And like I said, if you have any questions, reach out to Ask D2D.